back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the second week of August. So it'll be August 8th to August 14th. The way I structured this is I will talk first about the books that I've completed in the week, then I will talk about the books I'm currently reading, and finally I'll talk about any books that I'm planning on adding in the week to come. The first book that I finished this last week was Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is a pretty popular one among the fantasy booktubers that I know of, and it's the reason I picked it up was because it had been really hyped up by a lot of people I watch, and I loved it. It definitely seems like one of those books that you either love it or you hate it, entirely based on how much tolerance or love you have for the main character, Thomas Senlin, who is a fairly naive, scholarly type character who is trying to find his wife who's been lost in this Tower of Babel that they go to for their honeymoon. And I will admit that at the beginning of Senlin Ascends, I wanted to shake Senlin. He makes so many foolish decisions, but the way that he's characterized by Bancroft, the way you kind of get flashbacks about who Senlin is, really made that more believable to me. He's definitely more of the reluctant hero, and I really kind of enjoyed seeing his progression from the beginning to the end. I won't talk too much about my exact ratings for this. I'll leave that for the end of the month. But I ended up really enjoying this. I really liked both Senlin by the end, and some of the main characters I thought were really interesting to kind of see their progression, or some of the side characters, to see some of their progression through the story. I also really liked the setting. The tower, as has been mentioned in several reviews for this, dedicated reviews, the tower feels like its own character, and the way that Bancroft pairs this kind of mysterious nature of the tower that Senlin is trying to figure out with these really unsettling, really dangerous moments that Senlin runs into kind of keeps the reader as on the edge of their seat as Senlin is, and kind of trying to figure it out with him. So I really like the way that Bancroft handles that. I'm very curious to see what happens in Arm of the Sphinx. Unfortunately, I won't be starting that one until next month because, as I mentioned previously, I am reading one book in the Books of Babel series every month up to the release of the newest one, The Fall of Babel, in November. So I will have to be very patient, which is difficult because, like I said, I really liked a lot about Senlin, and that's honestly probably going to be in one of my favorites for 2021. The next book that I will talk about that I completed in the past week is Abhorsen, which is the third book. So Garth Nix wrote the Abhorsen trilogy, so it's the third one in that trilogy, but he has since added some prequel and other stories in that universe. So this wraps up that trilogy, but not the full series. And the Abhorsen trilogy basically follows this kingdom where on one side it's kind of somewhat modern country, like not exactly where we're at now, but not that far off. And then a very magical kind of fantasy European country that has necromancers. And so it kind of follows this group as they're trying to defend this more fantasy kingdom from all kinds of incursions and things that come up. I can't talk too much about the plot for Abhorsen because it is the third book in the trilogy, but I definitely really enjoyed this one. I really liked Sabriel, the first book in the series, when I read that back in June. In July, I read Lyriel, and that was much slower paced than Sabriel, and I didn't enjoy the characters as much. There's very little that happens action-wise in Lyrial, and that kind of dragged it down for me a little bit. I'm not a huge coming-of-age, character-focused person, so I definitely struggled with that a little bit. So Sabriel introduced the world, and then in Lyrial kind of introduced more of the main characters, and then Abhorsen really, where Lyrial set the stage for Abhorsen, it really is that final climactic battle that has kind of been promised since Lyrial, and I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the characters. I finally started really respecting and liking Lyrial and Sam a lot more so than I did in Lyrial. And I just really enjoyed this one. It definitely gave me a case of the feels. I am a crybaby when it comes to characters I care about, and I definitely cried reading Abhorsen. And I just love this world. So I probably will be, I had thought about pausing this series once I finish the trilogy, and then maybe coming back to some of these other stories later, but I think I'm just going to plow through and move to the next book in this universe, which is going to be a collection of short stories, one of which relates to Abhorsen, and that's, I believe it's called Across the Wall. So I'll be reading that next month. Okay, so moving on to books that I am currently reading. The first book on that list is The Stand. I am a little, around 40% done with this, which is roughly 500 pages in. I will admit, I am really not enjoying my experience with The Stand. It's very well written, because it's Stephen King, and I honestly, like him or hate him, I think that he's an incredibly talented author. I have enjoyed basically everything else I've read by Stephen King, but not this. The beginning of this, as I mentioned in the previous weekly wrap-up, is very focused on the outbreak of the virus that causes the basically an apocalyptic scenario, and you jump in the heads of people who are being affected by this virus, and it's very depressing. The way the government responds to it is just, as you would expect for a post-apocalypse, not great. It's just kind of a rough read, especially with everything that's been going on. It just hasn't been very fun. Not that, I mean, you don't go in expecting fun necessarily from a Stephen King story, but even it was happier than this is. It's getting more into the survivors starting to band together and trying to figure out a path forward for themselves. It's got more of that good versus evil vibe that the synopsis had kind of talked about. The main part that's killing me right now with The Stand is that I hate some of these characters, and I feel like some of them are supposed to be at least a little sympathetic. There's one of the characters in here who's just sees himself as a good guy, and I hate him so much. His chapters are such a slog. I actually prefer the more villainous chapters because at least they're not kidding themselves on whether or not they're actually a good person underneath. Maybe he'll turn it around. The character that I'm talking about is Larry, and I hate him so much. Not as much as I hate Harold. I did not expect to find a neckbeard in The Stand, but I found one, and I really hope something terrible happens to him because he's the worst. God, I hate him so much. So, like I said, some of these characters I really like. There are several that I'm a very big fan of. They have their hearts in the right place, even if they're not necessarily making the best decisions. I just wish I had more of their chapters and fewer chapters with Larry and Harold. Basically, is what it comes down to. Because I'm 500 pages, so Normally, I'm the kind of person who will happily DNF books I'm not enjoying because there's too many books to read to continue reading something I don't enjoy. However, this is the first time I have really understood the sunk cost fallacy when it comes to books. I've put 500 pages into The Stand, and it's a buddy read, so I really don't feel like I can bail on this, especially because Stephen King is a very good writer, and he might turn it around. So I'm gonna keep going. Like I said, I'm reading about 50 pages a day. I'm not having a great time, but I'm pretty committed to finishing this out. So we'll see where I'm at next week on this one. The next book that I'll talk about is Dune by Frank Herbert. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably seen the trailers for the new movie that's coming out, so I don't really feel like I need to give any kind of synopsis on that. I'm definitely liking Dune still. I'm 40% in now. It's kind of heavily into learning more about the Fremen culture now, and kind of more of the political intrigue side of things. So it's interesting, but it's kind of slow progress for me so far. I was hoping to have finished this last week, so I'm hoping that I will be able to finish this in the next couple of days, and then I can start one of my other books. But I am definitely still enjoying this and just feeling the pressure of my TBR. The next book that I am currently reading is Empire in Black and Gold, which is by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I just started this a couple days ago. I'm a couple chapters in, chapter 4 I think now. I'm definitely really liking this so far. I was really impressed by Tchaikovsky with Guns of the Dawn, and this definitely starts off with an interesting action scene and then kind of introduces you to some of the world building aspects. It's a fantasy. Basically, there's different groups that have characteristics that are based around, they're not insect like hybrids, but some of the people have abilities that are kind of similar to insects. They definitely don't look like insects, from what I understand of it so far. But it's got political intrigue, which has been really interesting so far. I really like the way that Tchaikovsky handles the world building. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting more into this and seeing more of the different people involved. But so far, definitely a fan of this. Then the last book that I am currently reading for the previous week is Son of a Lich by Zachary Pike. It's the second book in the Dark Prophet series, or saga? One of those things. And it basically just picks up where Orconomics left off. I can't get too much into the synopsis for that one because it's the second book in the series and it would spoil stuff for Orconomics. But I'll just say it's a satirical fantasy. It starts off a little more seriously than Orconomics did, so that's kind of an interesting change. And I know from reading the synopsis that where they're at right now is not where they're going to be. It's a little unfortunate that the synopsis spoiled some of that. But I'm definitely curious to see if it maintains this more grim tone, or if it'll be as funny as Orconomics was. I'm also reading this one via audiobook, and I am enjoying that so much more. Like, I really enjoyed the book, but having the voices by, I think it's Doug Tisdale Jr., who's the narrator for this, and it's just so much fun. I really like the way he does all the voices for it, so I'm definitely a fan of Son of a Lich so far. Since I have started several new books in the last week, the only book that I have upcoming that I might be adding for the next week is Stonehenge. And that is a history about Stonehenge that I had picked up after going to an exhibit at a local museum that was focused on that, so I'm excited to get to that. I'll probably start that once I finish Dune, so hopefully sometime later this week I'll be starting on that one. So that's everything I've read for this week. If you have any thoughts on the new ones that I've started, feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope you've been having a good reading week as well, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!